I can't hardly believe it, but we find ourselves at the close of another year. This episode, which you will be listening to in a few short moments, marks the end of season 2 of Fain Radio. We'll be back in mid-January with first episodes of season 3. I'm really enjoying lining up the next set of interviews. Definitely check back in then and give a listen. I have 2 things I'd love to tell you about. The first is, as some of you know, each year I put out a wall calendar that includes each of my new paintings of that year. This year's images include a little blue boat tied to a red poppy flower, silhouettes of birds in flight, and a lush garden with 2 empty chairs next to a garden shed for 2 lovers or friends to take a seat and have a moment together. If you'd like to check it out, go to the link in this episode's show notes. The second thing I'd like to say is thank you. Thank you so much for listening. And I sincerely hope that the show is adding some sweetness to your own creative life. So in honor of the coming new year, cheers to you. And I wish you much creative action and inspiration in the days to come. How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Annie Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
My name is Ginger Huebner. In my work life, certainly my architecture schooling, going to school for architecture, my partner in life, Scott Huebner, who happens to still be an architect, moving to the Pacific Northwest changed our lives, like just completely in how I see the world, creatively, and having kids. For the fun, the creative endeavors, I love moving my body. So things like paddleboarding, handstands, I just like to be active. And I feel like that may not make sense that that's a creative thing for me, but that's where I believe creative languages are way more than just visual art or, what people think of as art and creativity. So that's where I find those in my life and feel like they've come from.
I think the handstands are very creative. I was actually going to mention them in case you didn't. Number one, because I don't know many people our age that do handstands at this moment. And the other is I know that there's some training in terms of slowly building up your muscle, getting your wrist muscle, finding your balance. That's a creative process and it takes time and you have to be willing to go through a long process. It's not like, ta-da, I do a handstand. You have to be willing to work towards it. And I think it's amazing. And if anybody wants to see on your Instagram, there's some handstand proof.
Yeah, it's really true. I actually have done some posts about that. I'll be in the middle of doing it. And I'm like, wow, this relates directly to that piece of work I'm working on or whatever.
Yeah, it's actually all connected no matter what. What is your favorite medium to work with at the moment? Because I know you've done lots of mixed media, you explore with lots of things, you've taught a lot of different things. I was curious right now, what medium is calling you the most?
Collage and chalk, which is sort of where I began. It's where I feel the most at home, at least right now. And I really do think of it as a language. It's like my second language.
So you're doing chalk on top of the collages?
It depends. You can layer it lots of ways, but typically I will start with collage first and then chalk over and then layers around. And then sometimes more collage might come after that. Yeah.
Do you usually have a plan or do you do more free form? Like you're just flipping through your images and you kind of go from your gut, or do you sometimes have a real clear idea?
It can be both. So sometimes I'll have in my sketchbook, I'll have this, I think kind of in sort of diagrams, I guess. So I'll sketch a diagram of something that is alluding to, something happening in this way or something going this direction. And then there's something that's inspiring that piece. Typically a lot of times it's just a word or it's from something that I've read or a sermon I've listened to or something. So there's this something I'm listening to. And then the images I look for after I have this diagram, but the diagram is very abstract. I mean, it's just lines and shapes. And so as I find things very organically, just what's hitting me, just how I work with people in this process too. It's just whatever hits you, and the magazines and images and books, and then those become the edges of these shapes, or the object that is at the center of this diagram, or something that's rooting it, or whatever. It all just kind of unfolds. So it's a little of both.
I'm curious with the chalk, because on one hand, with the collage, you have you in it because you have the spontaneous kind of something that's drawing your hand towards ripping out that image or using that image. But then the chalk is you and all your shape. You know, you didn't cut out that shape and put it on. You're adding like your extra something on top. Is that kind of what you thought about for the chalk? Like you wanted to alter more, you wanted a little more of you in it?
Yeah. So the chalk actually is sort of the way I think about it, as I think of it as the emotion. It's the feeling that's very, very much, yeah, of course, it's like my heart, right? Like it's like you're the innermost piece of you that you can't cut out of a magazine. You can't form really super precisely. And it's a little bit of a surprise each time, right? So I have an idea of what I'm thinking for this field of color. And it really is stemming from what I'm feeling about that when I'm looking at images and thinking about this, whatever I'm thinking about.
Yeah. I love hearing about that, because I feel like that guides a lot of my decisions too, is that heart feeling that you can't really put words to. Mm-hmm. And it's a little hard to talk about because the word part. We'll talk more about the creative language stuff here in a minute. But I almost feel like, I wonder if you feel this way when making, it's half of the toolbox we're working from is to get quiet so that we could be in tune enough to pull from that heart place. Because if we're talking or distracted or not in that place, then we can't pull from that as easily. What do you think about that?
I agree. We won't hear it. It's a listening in a way that we don't typically allow ourselves in our busy, you know, we're just so busy. Everyone's busy. So yeah, that's part of that process for me. And again, when I work with other people, is just like taking space to listen to that. And it may seem cheesy or whatever, but there is really something there. And the minute you allow it, it's remarkable what comes out. Which I think a lot of artists of all forms would agree with that.
Do you have a mentor or teacher who really inspired you along the way to kind of hold on to the work you're doing now? You know, you transitioned from architecture to mixed media work. You're also a speaker. You also give retreats and things. Did you have somebody who was like, you can do it?
So it's interesting. I've had a lot of people along the way, I will say, but I happen to just have reconnected with a professor of mine from architecture school, who was the person who put chalk pastels on my desk during my second year and said, you need these. And he saw something, and when we were chatting, he didn't have any really realize like what he had done for me. And I didn't realize it till later either, but what he had given me was a tool that allowed me to share what I was feeling about this idea of something very structured. And, you know, we're drawing these very hardline drawings, and it's this thing we're building, right? An object. And I was always more interested in what it felt like. What did the space feel like? And you can't draw that. I mean, you're drawing a section or a plan or an elevation. It's a 5-year program. Over the next basically 3 years, I just kept I started adding little collage pieces to my drawings, and then I started flooding them with chalk. That's where this work came from. So I owe him a lot. And it's fascinating to have a conversation now, this many years later, with someone, and he was just like, well, I was young and I didn't really know what I was doing. I can't, you know, whatever. I mean, it was hugely impactful on my life. And once I worked as an architect for about 1.5 years after we graduated, and I realized that it wasn't what I was meant to be doing, because I was so obsessed with what things felt like. I wanted to talk about what the space or the site felt like. And so even when I worked, my first job was that person's also had an amazing impact on me as well. And when I was questioning like whether I should stay in architecture or not, he would allow me to do these drawings about our site visits. And still has them hanging in his office. So he was a huge piece of that puzzle too, saying, no, go and do that. Explore where this is going to take you. It's not here. And that's okay.
It makes me think two things. One is how some things needed to be on our path. So it's not a sign of not success that you didn't keep doing architecture. You needed that to do the next step to the next step. So we don't know where things will lead. And the other thing it makes me think of is sometimes the people around us don't even realize how much they've impacted us, or maybe how much we've impacted someone else on purpose or on accident.
Yeah, no, it's so true. Yeah, it was hard to and it was hard to make that break. I mean, I went to school for 5 years for a degree that I didn't feel like it was right where I was supposed to be. You know, I have a daughter who's going to college next year, and we're talking about what does she want to do, and so obviously I'm a big proponent of like, well, pick something, but it's okay if it's not, because we just don't know. We don't know where we're going to get led and where we're meant to be. But that degree was very important. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
You started a school later on. We'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but I was wondering if you could describe your teaching philosophy and what do you notice really gets young people hooked on art?
So I really love helping people find what lights them up creatively. And the tools that I use at my school and what I use, I mean, obviously it's visual art and design. There's lots of creative tools out there though, right? Like a lot of creative avenues and languages. But at Roots and Wings, we use art and design. And so I really try to help whoever I'm working with, but especially young kids, develop this idea of creative freedom. So that involves, in my mind, like not necessarily knowing where you're going to end up. So jumping into something without knowing, here's what we're making, you know. I really don't show examples. A lot of times when I'm teaching, I'll talk about the process and how many different things you can do with that process. And then I really believe in choice and like teaching, especially littles, because they, you know, they're just learning this, but like this idea of choice, that it's important. And it's so good that like your neighbor sitting next to you might make a different choice on how to use that medium or how to tweak that technique or whatever. And both are okay. So that then leads us to like the final sort of product, this idea of sharing our individuality as humans with the same materials. It's so cool, you know? And then another piece that's important to me to teach everybody is the idea of collaboration, working together on something. Like all of our hands are touching this thing. We might actually overlap what we're touching. It's okay. And look at this beautiful thing we made at the end. And that together we can also be celebrating our creativity and our individualities, but together.
It's awesome because you can pull these direct metaphors from that and practicing that as a skill, you know, not knowing where you're ending up, not knowing where you're going for our whole lives.
So true. Yeah.
And, you know, there's so much value in that. So, you know, art is valuable. I know we all agree on that. Our kids need art. The world needs art. We agree. In February of this year, you did a TED Talk Asheville. And in that talk, which anyone can go see on YouTube, you talk about creativity is a language that moves us beyond words. Can you tell us more about what that means to you and to the work you do?
As I shared, like what I do with my own work, it really became a language for me. Literally sharing things I'm feeling, also, you know, diagrammatically, sometimes places I've been or whatever, representing a lot of things, which most visual artists would say probably this is representing something that I'm thinking or saying. As I began to weave my educator self with my artist self, I started doing this process, the same process I do in my studio with other people. I love collaborating with people. That's like one of my favorite things to do. But I started doing residencies. And so I come into schools and work with teachers who are studying fill in the blank, literally anything. So it could be like life cycle of, you know, plants for a science class, or personal narratives for a second grade class, or fifth graders who are trying to understand and talk about and have conversations about their communities versus other people's communities. And we do this process, which I now call Create and Connect. It's the same thing I do for my own work. And it allows people to create visual translations, which is kind of what I call them, about something without saying anything, without actually saying any words. Then, you know, you can imagine a class of 30 kids, they each create a piece about whatever subject we're talking about. And then they sort of present them or exhibit them or talk, you know, allow everyone to kind of see everyone's work. And then that launches everyone into this whole other conversation with words that has so much more depth than if they were to just have started at all of their desks and say, tell me about your community. or tell me about the life cycle of a plant. It just is this amazing way to open up conversations into deeper and more meaningful places. It's interesting because I've done this work for a long time, and then I've been running a school at the same time. As the last 3 years since COVID have kind of unfolded, there's been a lot of ups and downs for everybody, but it's made me have to think differently about how I'm teaching in my own school. And then getting the opportunity to do this TED Talk, it made me really look back at myself, which I hadn't done in a bit because I'd been the director of a school, under this umbrella. And so when I really looked at what the work that I do as an artist for myself, but also with other people, that's what I'm talking about in the TED Talk. So I realized that not only is this a language for me, this is a language that anyone can use to have conversations about positive and fun things, but also about really hard things. And it's accessible, and it kind of, especially when you talk about divisive subjects, it sort of levels the playing field and creates this non-intimidating space to then have conversations that can be more difficult.
Have you had people be surprised by their experience going through some of those things with you? And they might think, oh, we're doing a collage. That's yay, But I could imagine, because of your style and your approach, that people by the end might be like deeply touched by kind of what happened and maybe surprised.
Every time. I'm not kidding. And thing is, the environment and the scale and the type of people and the age doesn't matter. And that's, I think, I get so nourished by it, not because yay me. It's like I am witnessing these moments that are very vulnerable, but no one's scared about it. Like, it's not happening in a way that's making people feel nervous. It's just happening. I did a workshop with a group of families at a therapeutic boarding, like residential treatment center. So the families it was their visiting weekend, and they haven't seen their kiddo in months, and they all are there, and they're all creating in a collaborative setting. And so sometimes I have this piece right here it's like 22 by 30 is kind of the size that I'll work with if I'm working with a small group, like a family. And at the end of that, the parents were like, how did you make us do that? And my answer, of course, was like, I didn't make you do anything. Like, this was inside of you, and it needed a way to come out. And in that case, if you think about that situation, the last thing that the kid probably wants to do is talk, let's talk some more.
Yeah.
It offers this alternative way of having a conversation that then again, they're like, oh, look at how you picked that. And then they're sitting there having this great, amazing, beautiful conversation at the end, and then wondering how in the world that happened. It's really special.
Yeah. It's clear that it is. And as you're talking, I'm realizing, like you were saying, it's almost like by going out and sharing instead of only making your work alone in your studio, which is totally valid too, but almost like when we go out and share what we made or make with people or teach, it could be any of those things, we're participating in like a nourishing loop.
Yes.
And so we're giving and they're giving, and we're giving and they're giving. And then this loop happens, and it's just like such a beautiful thing. And I love, it clearly lights you up. If anybody's watching the video later, you can see your happy face when you talk about it. You're in the middle of a transition at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're feeling about that? What next projects you have in mind? Because it's a very big, special project. There's a lot of emotion that goes into it, and this balance between what we know is a right, good decision versus the grief of letting something go that was a good thing.
Yeah. So I will be, closing Roots and Wings at the end of this school year. I founded that in 2009. My kids were 2 and 4. In my daughter's words, she said, "Mom, this is really wholesome. It's just full circle." And, part of it, the major, the long and short of it is COVID took a lot out of our school, and things just, haven't really been able to work themselves back. And it's a hard and very bittersweet decision. But again, sort of having had the TED Talk emerge when it did in the middle of this kind of time frame, I couldn't, again, timing is what it is, and things happen. And so I'm really leaning into this being sort of me stepping back out from underneath that umbrella of the school and as that director hat, and returning back to this work that isn't new. It's just been, on the slow burn over here. There are moments where I'm sad about it, of course, and probably will be for a while, but I have created through the school so much community, and there's just so many people that I've met that will fuel me forever. And many of those same connections will be pieces and parts of my journey ahead. So I'm basically I moved into this new studio space, which has been great and amazing and really energizing in a way I haven't felt in a long time. I'll be doing new artwork for myself, but then I'm also just basically trying to take the Create and Connect workshops I just was talking about, those sorts of things, and level them up and scale them out in a way that I just haven't ever tried to do because I've been running a school. Not that it's like, yay, it's fixed already, here we go. I'm in the midst of kind of remarketing myself in a sense, right? And that is scary. And I don't know how it's going to unfold exactly, but I do know what I feel called to do. I think this work is definitely what I'm meant to be doing in this world. And so we'll see what little pathways continue to open up and unfold.
When you just said it's not new, it's more a reshuffling or I just imagine like you're shaking the snow globe of you and then all the same particles will come down, but just in a different place.
Right. Yeah.
How do people participate in your Create and Connect experiences if they were curious about that?
Sure. There's lots of different scales. Essentially, I work as small as with one person on a collaborative portrait, which is the one I was showing you, 22 by 30. I call them collaborations, not because I'm making it with you. I'm basically facilitating it with you, right? So you're the one looking for all the images and finding all the things and having, you have your starting point. I just help with sort of the technical stuff, how we want to think about layering things before we glue down. And then how do we want to tape it off and mask it before we chalk? And what other layers do you want to add? So I'm just sort of I'm like the little teacher, just asking questions along the way. I also do that with partners or families. So same scale. And it's just so fun. It's really amazing. And people do it for lots of different reasons. Recently, I've had a couple of families who have kids leaving the nest. So it's kind of a neat way to capture everybody before the family breaks apart in that sense. In different places, like with organizations and staff teams, boards of directors, you can imagine I do the same thing. So it can be one piece we're creating together or smaller individual pieces. Again, it can just be for fun, like it's a way to connect with your team and just be together. Staff, like professional development, it could have an angle where we're talking about a subject that may be more serious or just something that we want to think about in a new way, and have a conversation in a different way. And then I've done Create and Connect community portraits. So they're giant. They're like the size of a 6 by 2.5 foot table. I bring a big piece of paper that's all chalked or more than one. And then we're doing something that's more team building type. So I have prompts that I'll give people and they're sitting around this giant piece of beautifully colored paper and we're adding layers using different art materials. And then we might switch if we have more than one tables with paper. And at the end, you have these amazing community portraits that, for whatever organization or whoever I'm doing this with, they keep them and hang them. And, they're just a beautiful reminder of this. It's just like what everyone was feeling. It's all on that piece of paper, It's really unique. I've done them for events too, where in between things, it's just hanging on the wall and people just are adding layers as the weekend goes by at a retreat or something. Another piece that developed over COVID was doing this virtually, because it's obviously pretty hands-on. But over COVID, I developed a way to do it with a little bit more ease. So instead of using chalk, we just use colored pencils or any coloring tools that you're comfortable with. I mean, some people were doing it with paint, but we would create in a notebook, like a composition book. Again, stemming from something I've done it with some faith-based communities. So it's like from the Sunday sermon, and then we're meeting on Monday or Tuesday, and we're translating what we heard, and we're using collage and then color pencils or whatever kind of coloring tools. So I built kits for some people, and they've done it with me from afar, or people can learn how to do that. I do facilitate training for that, and then they can use it with their community as a practice. And for me, I've been doing this for myself and a friend of mine since December of 2020, once a week. And it's such an important part of my week now. And I just never imagined that would be.
It's like you're facilitating taking things from the inside and putting them on the outside. And also that's a visual reminder, because every time you see it, you will remember that experience. You know, you will remember those feelings. What would you tell your maker self of 10 years ago that would help give her trust in the fact that all these tiny little bits that you don't know where you're going to end up would all work out? No, and that the tiny parts really matter. What I'm trying to say is sometimes we feel like I can only do big things. Like, why haven't I done my big thing? I'm failing. And actually the only answer is more of like a hacking away at it. And that's is the only option, which in therein lies the good, and therein lies what we should be doing. And that there's so much value in that, which means we could maybe enjoy that instead of always telling ourselves, why haven't you done the whole grand big thing? And I was thinking about even when you started your school, that's when we first met. It was such a tiny little acorn, you know, and then what it became, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I, you know, it's interesting because I feel like I could also tell myself right now, I could probably use this advice like in this moment, right? Every few years, I think we all have moments like that. But I think that what I would say is to listen really carefully to all of the little layers that are all of those little tiny things. I think about them as layers, and know that it's not about like, oh, what's that final piece going to be like? It's about what each layer is offering you in that moment. It's so easy to be like, but what's it going to all be at the end, you know? And the reality is, hopefully it's not about the end. It's about the journey and all the different things that we're learning and growing and becoming through every little layer that's added.
I like the idea of layers. And it just made me think too, like we have these to-do lists and sometimes they're completely impossible to-do lists. Lately, I've been thinking of them as like tiny bit lists.
Instead. I love that.
And so then we can like really celebrate and be so happy we did 3 or 5 tiny bits a day.
I love that. The tiny bits. I'm going to start doing that.
What is filling up your inspiration cup these days?
Let's see. I'm really being inspired by my space right now. Life can be busy and I feel like a ping pong ball a lot of times. I'm just like, you know, going between things. And it's just, I haven't had a space like this in a long time where I can just be in here and feel like the minute I'm just in here, I feel like I'm centered. So I'm really grateful for that. My friends and my family, I feel like coming out of, again, the last couple of years of just, as a director of a school, especially of kids under 5, it was really stressful. I was really scared for everybody, not just myself. And the idea of connecting and being in spaces with people I'm finally feeling like I'm letting go of that a little bit and feeling more comfortable and not scared when I'm with people. And so I've been trying to gather people and, you know, connect in a way that I haven't in a long time. And so that's inspiring me just as a human. I like people. I like being around people. I like engaging with people. My kids make fun of me because they're like, Mom, did you talk to the package guy today? What do you say? Because I literally love, like, anyone I might interact with, I end up befriending. And I just really thrive off that. And I missed it a lot. I think I'd say those 2 things. Yeah.
Yeah. It's true. Real life people are different than Zoom live people.
Yeah.
It's all good, but yes, it's different.
Right.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for everybody out there just doing the best they can to fold creativity into their daily lives?
I think I would say, 1, creativity can be a lot of things. A lot of people will be like, well, I'm not artistic, so therefore, like, in other words, that equals I'm not creative. And I just don't believe that. I really believe that we all have a creative language and languages, things that inspire us and light us up. So just remembering that that's in all of us. We want to listen to it. Because essentially that's you following your heart. I mean, that may be a saying that people are like, oh, that's so cheesy. But to me, that's when I say, like, what lights me up, that's what that means. It's that feeling you get when something really, you feel really nurtured by it. And when we're doing things that nurture us and like light us up, that means we're returning that, like we're putting that back out into the world. And if all of us were able to harness that and actually listen to that and do that, how amazing would it be? And to remember that it's not like whatever that turns out looking like or turns into, love it, embrace it. Don't compare it with what you're seeing on social media or not seeing or hearing or telling, what people are telling you should be. Your journey is your journey, no matter what.
Thanks so much to Ginger for joining us today, and thanks so much to you for listening. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. There is no end in creativity. Hence, to strive towards an end result is a fool's errand. Set goals, make music, and paint pictures. But know that the crux of your happiness balances delicately on the wings of the act of creativity itself, not at the finish line. Brandon Boyd.